In Gaza, let's now cross live to the Israeli city of Tel Aviv and speak with Rai Special Correspondent Karl Bostic. Karl, it's good to have you with us. So what's the latest on the airstrikes to have hit Gaza today? And can you give us more details about why the ceasefire was not extended?
Good afternoon. That's right. Well, after 1 week of uneasy quiet and calm, the fighting has continued, has resumed with aerial bombardments and artillery fire across Gaza from the Jabalia camp in the north to the southern city of Khan Yunis to the border city of Rafah. Keep in mind, the Gaza Strip is only 25 miles long. In area, it's a quarter the size of Abuja. And up until now, Israel had ordered all of those in the northern part in Gaza City to evacuate to the south because they were concentrating on the tunnel network. And so that's why they went to Khan Yunis and Rafah. So now you've got 80% of Gaza's 2.3 million population displaced. 80%. That's 1.8 million people, many of them largely in Khan Yunis now, a city of 400,000 that's now about 1 million. And now the bombing has resumed, but now the bombing is targeting Khan Yunis and Rafah, targeting Khan Yunis because Israel maintains that that's where the senior Hamas military leadership is hiding. But now what Israel has done is they've actually dropped leaflets in Arabic telling people to evacuate, to head for the south, to head to Rafah. They also have published a map with evacuation zones, with dozens, if not hundreds, of coded zones and neighborhoods across Gaza where it's not safe to live, where it's not safe to be, that they must live. And for those who've already left North Gaza, they're saying, where else can we go? We already just moved to Rafah, and you're telling us to go to Rafah. We just moved to Khan Yunis, telling us to go to Rafah. And now Rafah and Khan Yunis are both being bombed. In fact, one bomb landing next to a hospital. So the death toll is now several dozen. So this does not look good in the sense that we haven't even seen the beginning of a second phase yet, because this is all really the prelude to a ground offensive.
All right, then, but the Secretary of State, Blinken, visited Israel yesterday for a third time since the war began. Now, are his visits making any difference at all, Karl?
Well, what's really interesting is this. He's been here 3 times, and each time the U.S. is so engaged with what's going on in Israel. It's very unusual. You have a war going on, and one of its allies is sitting as Secretary of State. He is sitting in on war cabinet meetings. That's unprecedented. But however, it's now being characterized that up until today, those meetings were very, very tense and blunt because the U.S. is getting a lot of criticism and blowback for its unequivocal support for Israel. And U.S. was basically saying, you've got to be more restrained, more targeted in your approach. You can't have such a high level of intensity. I mean, for example, 90% of the bombs used in North Gaza up until now in Gaza City were 2,000-pound bombs. He's saying you've got to show more restraint, you've got to minimize casualties, you've got to guarantee the flow of humanitarian aid and start planning for the day after. For this meeting, it turns out that actually they were more receptive to him, but they were also saying that if we have any indication that a Hamas senior leader, for example, the leader himself, Yahya Sinir, is in a residential neyborhood that we said was safe, we're going to go after him. We're going to target it. So that's where we are right now. And in terms of why it collapsed, you asked a moment ago. Hamas had submitted a list of 7 elderly men and 3 bodies. That's why Israel claimed the truce was violated, because Hamas did not keep its promise of releasing all the women. At least 20 women are still in captivity out of a total of 137 hostages. That's why Israel say the truce had been violated by not releasing all the women.
And there's still a contentious issues over the hostages. Now, what has been the response in Israel to the war resuming, and what does this mean for Gazans generally?
Well, it's interesting because there's a forum now of hostage families, and they released a statement. From the very beginning, people were very skeptical about these two goals of bringing the hostages back home, but also eliminating and eradicating Hamas at all costs, so that it never again poses a threat to Israel again from Gaza. And many said that these are incompatible goals. And that's where we are right now, because the dilemma is this. Can you win a war without undermining the safety and the lives of the hostages? Or if you do make the hostages a first priority, how does that affect winning the war? And they're saying that you're undermining the prospect of winning the freedom and safety and saving lives of the hostages by continuing the war. So amongst the hostage families and supporters of the hostages, they're against the resumption. But a lot of people in Israel, they're still very, very, quite frankly, bullish about it, and they're saying, finish the job. As far as the Gazans are concerned, the UN has issued a statement calling this catastrophic. Again, keep in mind, those numbers you cited, 13,000, are very, very conservative because people are still digging out missing people from the rubble in the north. At least 7,000 Gazans are still missing. So that number could skyrocket in terms of casualties. And once again, aid truck deliveries are in limbo because up before the war, about 30, 40% of Gaza was dependent on food aid and dependent on the UN. It's been exacerbated. We're hearing stories of, people trying to cook or trying to boil water over burnt plastic in order to cook macaroni. I mean, just horrible scenes that are simply apocalyptic. And right now, the new norm, I mentioned the other day about orphans being in the street. Now the new norm is just a very extreme scene of massive begging on the streets of Gaza right now.
Very good, Karl. And briefly on this, I'd like us to go back to the issue of Yahya Sinir, the Hamas leader in Gaza. He's credited with the October 7th attacks in Israel. Is Israel still active looking for him? And what is the status of Ismail Haniyeh in Qatar? Does he still wield power, some form of power in Gaza?
Well, very simply, no. People here in Israel call Yahya Sinir, they call him dead man walking. In fact, it's funny, interesting that you raise that as a question because, if Israel is to eradicate successfully Hamas, one negotiated dimension is, should there be an exit strategy that allows him to leave Gaza without being killed? This has happened before in the Munich Olympic massacre of 1972. The leaders were identified and they were found 7 years later. So there could perhaps, no one's talking about it, there could perhaps be on the cards an exit strategy for leaders like Yahya Sinir to have guaranteed exile. That's one thing. The second thing is this. One reason why also the truce may have collapsed because there could be an internal split in Hamas where moderates want the war to end, want all the hostages released, want the women released. And yet the problem is this. The political leadership in Hamas that live in Qatar that you mentioned, they have no control over what happens in Gaza, the militant wing. And in fact, it's a disconnect because sometimes the comms are down, the comms are not working. So there really is sometimes a significant gap between what Hamas is saying in Qatar and what Hamas is saying in Gaza. For all intents and purposes, what matters is what Hamas in Gaza says, what Yahya Sinir decides.
Thank you so much, Arise Special Correspondent Karl Bostic, monitoring that story over in Israel. Thank you so much for being on Newsday.